Welcome back, everyone. We're continuing our review series of Dr. Jordan B. Peterson's 12 Rules for Life and Antidote to Chaos. We're moving on to Rule 10, which is be precise in your speech. I love this chapter. I think it's a very important chapter. I say that for every one of these videos. Every one of these videos, I feel like I say, oh, this is a very important chapter, but I think it is. So, be precise in your speech is the last chapter of the book with a pretty self-explanatory title. The last two chapters gonna take some inferring and some actual reading to figure out what's going on in the chapters. The two main points I'd quickly summarize in this chapter before we dive into it here that I think Jordan is addressing and discussing is being precise in your speech, telling people what you want, telling people how you feel, and more importantly, more specifically, telling people exactly what you want, telling people exactly how you feel, not mincing your words, and learning to stand up for yourself when you should stand up for yourself, when you feel that inside of you. And the second point I would say he's addressing in this book is the importance of not ignoring problems in your life, not pushing issues, not pushing things that you're uncomfortable doing, that you don't want to do, that's hard, that's difficult, from pushing them into the future for tomorrow's problems. So he combats that. He talks about how it's a bad idea and how a lot of problems in our lives stem from procrastination and stem from us not taking action in the moment when we know we should. So without further ado, I'm diving right into Rule 10 here, and I'm going to skip the first few pages here, and I'm going to go to what I think are probably one of the first key points or highlights. I'll just be addressing the highlights of the chapter here, of course. So let's get into this section here. What do we see when we don't know what we're looking at? What is it that is the world after the Twin Towers disintegrate? What, if anything, is left standing? What dread beast rises from the ruins when the invisible pillars supporting the world's financial system tremble and fall? What do we see when we're swept up in the fire and drama of a National Socialist rally, or cower, paralyzed with fear, in the midst of a massacre in Rwanda? What is it that we see when we cannot understand what's happening to us, cannot determine where we are, know no longer who we are, and no longer understand what surrounds us? What we don't see is the well-known and comforting world of tools, of useful objects, of personalities. We don't even see familiar obstacles, sufficiently troubling though they are in normal times, already mastered, that we can simply step around. What we perceive when things fall apart is no longer the stage and settings of habitable order. It's the eternal watery tahu vabahu, formless emptiness, and the tahom, the abyss, to speak biblically, the chaos forever lurking beneath our thin surfaces of security. It's from that chaos that the holy word of God himself extracted order at the beginning of time, according to the oldest opinions expressed by mankind, and it's in the image of that same word that we were made, male and female, according to the same opinions. It's from that chaos that whatever stability we had the good fortune to experience emerged originally for some limited time when we first learned to perceive. It's chaos that we see when things fall apart, even though we cannot truly see it. What does all of this mean? So what I think Jordan's talking about here is what happens when we experience a direct encounter with chaos. And chaos I don't think necessarily has to mean life-altering, life-shattering events. It can be small things like getting a flat tire or missing a payment for a bill or, getting a parking ticket or something. But it could be bigger things, getting into a divorce, getting laid off from work, the big life catastrophes and the small catastrophes and everything in between. When these things happen that are outside of our routines, outside of our daily schedules, that throw us off, it's the unexpected. It's chaos. Everyone likes to be in order. Everyone likes to know what's going on all the time. I like to. I can be spontaneous at times, but I always like to I always write a to-do list, and I think I've talked about it before in one of my previous videos. but I always like to have a to-do list, and I write it the night before for the next day, so I have one for today, and I have a general outline. I know that things are going to happen in my to-do list throughout the day that I'm not going to be able to anticipate, but for me, I need that structure. I need to know what I'm focusing on today. I need to know what the big events today are, what's going on today. I know I have some friends who don't do that. They get out of bed and just go. That's cool, but there's no way. There's no way I'd be able to do that. So that's what I think he's talking about here, and I'm going to skip a page over to this next part. There's a story for children, There's No Such Thing as a Dragon by Jack Kent, that I really like. It's a very simple tale, at least on the surface. I once read its few pages to a group of retired University of Toronto alumni and explained its symbolic meaning. It's about a small boy, Billy Bixby, who spies a dragon sitting on his bed one morning. It's about the size of a house cat and friendly. He tells his mother about it, but she tells him that there's no such thing as a dragon. So it starts to grow. It eats all of Billy's pancakes. Soon it fills the whole house. Mom tries to vacuum, but she has to go in and out of the house through the windows because of the dragon everywhere. It takes her forever. Then the dragon runs off with the house. Billy's dad comes home and there's just an empty space where he used to live. The mailman tells him where the house went. He chases after it, climbs up the dragon's head and neck, now sprawling out into the street, and rejoins his wife and son. Mom still insists that the dragon doesn't exist, but Billy, who's pretty much had it by now, insists, "There's a dragon, Mom." Instantly it starts to shrink. Soon it's cat-sized again. Everyone agrees that dragons of that size, 1, exist, and 2, are much preferable to their gigantic counterparts. Mom, eyes reluctantly open by this point, asks somewhat plaintively why it had to get so big. Billy quietly suggests maybe it wanted to be noticed. Maybe. That's the moral of many, many stories. Chaos emerges in a household bit by bit. Mutual unhappiness and resentment pile up. Everything untidy is swept under the rug where the dragon feasts on the crumbs. But no one says anything, as the shared society and negotiated order of the household reveals itself as inadequate or disintegrates in the face of the unexpected and threatening. Everybody whistles at the dark instead. Communication would require admission of terrible emotions like resentment, terror, loneliness, despair, jealousy, frustration, hatred, boredom. Moment by moment, it's easier to keep the peace. But in the background, in Billy Bixby's house, and in all that are like it, the dragon grows. One day it bursts forth in a form that no one can ignore. It lifts the very household from its foundations. Then it's an affair, or a decades-long custody dispute of ruinous economic and psychological proportions. Then it's the concentrated version of the acrimony that could have been spread out tolerably issue by issue over the years of the pseudo-paradise of the marriage. Every one of the 300,000 unrevealed issues, which have been lied about, avoided, rationalized away, hidden like an army of skeletons in some great horrific closet, bursts forth like Noah's flood, drowning everything. There's no ark because no one built one, even though everyone felt the storm gathering. Excuse me. Don't ever underestimate the destructive power of sins of omission. That's pretty obvious there. He tells the story first to go on to talk about what I said is what I think are one of the two main points he makes in this chapter. And this is kind of the point he makes for the first half of the chapter, the importance of addressing issues in your life, whether it's in your own individual life, whether it's issues with your partner, your spouse, it's issues with your children, issues with coworkers at work, and etc. How it's so important to address things that are going on in our life early on instead of sweeping them under the rug, letting the dragon grow, as what happens to Billy Bixby and his family. So I thought that was a great way to sum it up, the importance of addressing things when they first pop up in your life. We'll get to the next part which is, I guess, the second point I would say Jordan makes about the importance of being precise in your speech, which is the title of this chapter, and I'm going to find it right here. Don't hide baby monsters under the carpet. They will flourish. They will grow large in the dark. Then when you least expect it, they will jump out and devour you. You'll descend into the interdeterminate, confusing hell instead of ascending into the heaven of virtue and clarity. So here's the last, I think this is it's the last section of the chapter here, where it talks about the importance of being precise in your speech, the importance of precision in your life. Wheat from chaff. Precision specifies. When something terrible happens, it's precision that separates the unique, terrible thing that's actually happened from all of the other equally terrible things that might have happened but didn't. If you wake up in pain, you might be dying. You might be dying slowly and terribly from one of a diverse number of painful, horrible diseases. If you refuse to tell your doctor about your pain, then what you have is unspecified. It could be any of those diseases, and certainly, since you've avoided the diagnostic conversation, the act of articulation is something unspeakable. But if you talk to your doctor, all those terrible possible diseases will collapse with luck into just one terrible or not so terrible disease, or even into nothing. Then you can laugh at your previous fears, and if something really is wrong, well, you're prepared. Precision may leave the tragedy intact, but it chases away the ghouls and the demons. What you hear in the forest but cannot see might be a tiger. It might even be a conspiracy of tigers, each hungrier and more vicious than the other, led by a crocodile. But it might not be, too. If you turn and look, perhaps you'll see that it's just a squirrel. I know someone who was actually chased by a squirrel. Something's out there in the woods. You know that with certainty, but often it's only a squirrel. If you refuse to look, however, then it's a dragon, and you're no knight. You're a mouse confronting a lion, a rabbit paralyzed by the gaze of a wolf. And I'm not saying that it's always a squirrel. Often it's something truly terrible. But even what's terrible in actuality often pales in significance compared to what's terrible in imagination. And often what cannot be confronted because of its horror in imagination can in fact be confronted when reduced to its still admittedly terrible actuality. If you shirk the responsibility of confronting the unexpected, even when it appears in manageable doses, reality itself will become unsustainably disorganized and chaotic. Then it will grow bigger and swallow all order, all sense, and all predictability. Ignored reality transforms itself, reverts back into the great goddess of chaos, the great reptilian monster of the unknown, the great predatory beast against which mankind has struggled since the dawn of time. If the gap between pretense and reality goes unmentioned, it will widen, you will fall into it, and the consequences will not be good. Ignored reality manifests itself in an abyss of confusion and suffering. Be careful with what you tell yourself and others about what you've done, what you're doing, and where you're going. Search for the correct words. Organize those words into the correct sentences, and those sentences into the correct paragraphs. The past can be redeemed when reduced by precise language to its essence. The present can flow by without robbing the future if its realities are spoken out clearly. With careful thought and language, the singular, stellar destiny that justifies existence can be extracted from the multitude of murky and unpleasant futures that are far more likely to manifest themselves of their own accord. This is how the I and the Word make habitable order. Don't hide baby monsters under the carpet. They will flourish. They'll grow large in the dark. Then when you least expect it, they will jump out and devour you. You'll descend into an interdeterminate, confusing hell instead of ascending into the heaven of virtue and clarity. Courageous and truthful words will render your reality simple, pristine, well-defined, and habitable. If you identify things with careful attention and language, you bring them forward as viable, obedient objects, detaching them from their underlying near-universal interconnectedness. You simplify them. You make them specific and useful, and reduce their complexity. You make it possible to live with them and use them without dying from that complexity, with its attendant uncertainty and anxiety. If you leave things vague, then you'll never know what's one thing and what's another. Everything will bleed into everything else. This makes the world too complex to be managed. You have to consciously define the topic of a conversation, particularly when it's difficult, or it becomes about everything, and everything is too much. This is so frequently why couples cease communicating. Every argument degenerates into every problem that ever emerged in the past, every problem that exists now, and every terrible thing that's likely to happen in the future. No one can have a discussion about everything. Instead, you can say, this exact precise thing, this is what's making me unhappy. This exact precise thing, this is what I want, as an alternative, although I'm open to suggestions if they're specific. This exact, precise thing, this is what you could deliver so that I'll stop making your life and my life miserable. But to do that, you have to think, what's wrong exactly? What do I want exactly? You must speak forthrightly and call forth the habitable world from chaos. You must use honest, precise speech to do that. If instead you shrink away and hide, what you're hiding from will transform itself into the giant dragon that lurks under your bed and in your forest and in the dark recesses of your mind, and it will devour you. You must determine where you've been in your life so that you can know where you are now. If you don't know where you are precisely, then you could be anywhere. Anywhere is too many places to be, and some of those places are very bad. You must determine where you've been in your life, because otherwise you can't get to where you're going. You can't get from point A to point B unless you're already at point A. And if you're just anywhere, the chances you're at point A are very small indeed. You must determine where you're going in your life because you cannot get there unless you move in that direction. Random wandering won't move you forward. It'll instead disappoint and frustrate you and make you anxious and unhappy and hard to get along with, and then resentful, and then vengeful, and then worse. Say what you mean so that you can find out what you mean. Act out what you say so you can find out what happens. Then pay attention. Note your errors. Articulate them. Strive to correct them. That's how you discover the meaning of your life. That will protect you from the tragedy of your life. How could it be otherwise? Confront the chaos of being. Take aim against a sea of troubles. Specify your destination and chart your course. Admit to what you want. Tell those around you who you are. Narrow and gaze attentively and move forward forthrightly. Be precise in your speech.